my whole time in India just felt like one big trip because everything is so different than what you're used to. And your orientation, your level of settledness is different. So when I started to learn about Ayurveda, I had been through yoga for many years. I had meditated every day and all that stuff. But Ayurveda was like the missing piece for my yoga journey, where yoga and meditation helped me develop more awareness and mastery of, say, like my will, my thoughts, my awareness. It sort of helped with that piece, but it never helped me with my emotions and my emotional body.
Many people want to navigate life with peace and joy, but struggle to connect to their intuition. They find themselves overwhelmed, burned out, and frustrated. My name is Francesca Phillips, and I'm obsessed with spirituality and psychology and how the two can intersect to help you live a successful and intuitive life. I believe each of us can accomplish amazing things through balance and healthy habits instead of burnout. Consider this your go-to resource for where spiritual wellness and mindful productivity meets practical wisdom. If you're craving positivity and want to know how to find the answers within, instead of searching endlessly without, then you're in the right place. Get ready to feel supported and inspired. This is the Good Space Podcast. You're listening to the Good Space Podcast, episode number 48, A Beginner's Guide to Ayurveda, Balancing the Three Doshas and Infertility with Heather Grzych. Before we dive in, I want to give my warm appreciation to our reviewer of the week, Jiha Huang, and they say, I really enjoy listening to the Good Space throughout the day to uplift my mood. I think the episodes are interesting and easy to follow as well. Jia, thank you. Thank you for your review. I'm glad our episodes are interesting and also easy to follow. Let us know if you have any specific topics you want us to cover. We absolutely want to make sure that we keep it interesting for you. So thank you for being part of the Good Space community. If you want to be highlighted in an upcoming episode and help further the mission of the Good Space, make sure to subscribe and give us a review on Apple Podcasts so I can then highlight your review in an upcoming episode. It only takes a minute. You can pause the episode and come right back. Make sure to screenshot this episode on your phone and tag us on your Instagram story at @FindYourGoodSpace, #TheGoodSpace, to let me know that you're joining in today, as you know that I love to share those screenshots on our stories too. Welcome to the Good Space Podcast. Today we are going to speak to a very special guest. I have Heather Grzych. She is the author of the Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility and the host of the Wisdom of the Body podcast. She's a board-certified Ayurvedic practitioner. She bridges the worlds of conventional and alternative medicine to help women and men heal their physical and emotional lives. Heather is on the board of directors for the National Ayurvedic Medical Association and has consulted with doctors, governments, and insurance companies. She offers virtual consultations and programs worldwide. If you have heard her on another podcast, you will love her. She is just such a wealth of knowledge and is someone that I actually heard on Clubhouse and just immediately was like, I need to have you on the show. So thank you, Heather, so much for being here.
I'm so happy to connect with you, Francesca. Thank you for bringing me on. I'm excited to connect with your listeners.
Yes. And this is definitely a topic I know they are going to love. Yeah. So why don't we just jump into it? Can you tell us what Ayurveda is and who created it and all of that stuff?
Oh, yeah. So Ayurveda is a form of indigenous medicine from India where, it's been their practice for many years. They have a few other indigenous medicines as well, but this is kind of the biggest one. So say they have 400,000 something, Ayurvedic doctors in India, but here in the United States, we have say like 1,000 because it's newer. It's sort of, we have what we call an allopathic medical system, which is our conventional medical system. So it's sort of slowly making its way all over the world, not just in the United States. And Ayurvedic medicine is, you'll hear about Ayurveda in pop culture as well. You'll hear about it like in the wellness field. You'll hear anybody who like drinks turmeric in the morning, in their morning beverage, or, does oil pulling where you like kind of swish oil around in your mouth to clean your teeth and nourish the gums, or anybody who does oil massages on their skin, that's a common practice that is done, or tongue scraping. These are examples of practices that come from Ayurvedic practices. And so it's kind of permeated its way alongside yoga into the sort of wellness culture, but it's also a clinical practice that people study as a form of medicine. So, so it's both self-care and it's also something that you could do and go see a practitioner to get help from. So what it is though, and what it's based on and what makes it different than other medicines is it literally means the science of life. So if you think about disease, and we're taught in Ayurvedic medicine that disease forms through a progression of actions and conditions that continue. And so if you can catch a disease at the beginning, you'll have like an easier time, getting rid of it. Or if you catch it later, you're going to have a harder time getting rid of it. So because we have so many people now who've done yoga and meditation and are more conscious and more aware of their bodies, Ayurveda is growing because there's more people now who are aware of what's going on in their bodies early, who can feel things early before there's, say, like a current medical terminology diagnosis for it. They'll feel something, they don't have like a word for it. So what we do is we help people understand what those things are that are more the roots of disease, and nip those in the bud early. So it's, the science of life. You could sort of say, biology almost kind of sounds like that as well, but it's really understanding how nature works, how our bodies work, how diseases form, how health is formed, how the tissues regenerate, what makes a tissue sort of turn out a certain way. And it also tells you a lot about yourself. So we have this concept of doshas. The understanding of doshas can be a little bit confusing in our culture because it's a word that comes from a different culture. So it comes with its own translation that comes through the people who are interpreting it, right? So a dosha literally means, or at least the most literal translation that I've found, means that which can go out of balance. So the idea is that you have these sort of properties in your body that are in an optimal balance. So you have not too much or too little of these certain properties in your body. And we call those doshas, and there are 3 of them. And if you want, I'm happy to go over them at some point. The idea is that when your doshas are in balance, that's when you have that health, that sort of benchmark of health that we're looking for in Ayurveda. What a lot of people also know about Ayurveda is that like doshas have been interpreted as a body type. You've probably seen it like that. It's not a body type, but people do have a tendency to have certain doshas go out of balance more than others. And that's certainly the case, whereas certain phases of your life, certain doshas are more likely to go out of balance. So like, for example, when you're older, when you're like, say 50 and above, or, even as soon as our collagen starts decreasing, for example, in our bodies, that we would consider that like kapha dosha. It's like the juicy, sort of thick, dense robustness of the body that makes us young. And as we get older, that sort of starts to thin out. And like, me being in my 40s now, I can totally tell how that happens. So that sort of maybe thinning or erosion of tissues that is natural and normal as you age would be considered a higher level of vata dosha, but it's normal in that stage of life. But if you're getting that, say when you're 25, then we are like, well, why is that person having that happen when they're 25? So that we can really help people with longevity, understanding these different properties in the body.
It's so fascinating and so interesting. And from what I'm hearing, just to reiterate for whoever's listening, that it's more about getting to the root of things and it's a proactive approach. Would you say that the doshas, because I know I've done my own research on it, and I actually have a book for like dummies on Ayurveda because I was really interested in it about a year ago. But then I was like, wait, like, am I doing this right? And it was kind of like overwhelming. But for the doshas, I almost see it as like elements, right? Like I've seen fire, water, air, like I've seen that be integrated into it. But I really love how you said that Ayurveda is also the knowledge of like nature and how things are naturally happening and occurring. And so are the doshas more like a name or a way to like make tangible certain aspects of our nature. And so like how they combine with each other. Is that what you were saying?
Because Ayurveda is like Chinese medicine in that they didn't have a periodic table of elements, 5,000 years ago. So it's more intuitive the way that they talk about nature and about what we see in the world and in the physical world. And doshas, they will fluctuate based on what's happening in our environment. And they will fluctuate based on our behaviors and what we take into our bodies, what we choose to take into our bodies, what we choose to allow to have in contact with our bodies, or what we don't choose and just happens anyway. So that's how the doshas, and so I'll give you the tangible examples of what the doshas are. So there's vata, pitta, and kapha. Vata is the air and the space element. So it's the most intangible of every dosha. And that's the example of like when you have a lot of dryness, you're traveling and your digestion gets off, or you're just feeling like dispersed, like ADHD, attention everywhere. It's that sort of lack of cohesion and focus, which can feel quite creative and alive at times. But then when it gets too much, it's sort of like haywire. And so what we would see physically in a body, because the mind, the energy, and the body are kind of all moving in alignment, where if you have a tissue change in your body, that's going to change your experience of your body. That's going to change your experience of the world, because the world comes through your body. So the air and space elements, when you have a lot of that, you're going to feel like more sensitive, more permeable. It's pretty big for people to feel that way. They'll feel more than other people. And so that's like the air and space element. And so dryness, roughness, things like that. The second dosha is pitta dosha. And that's the one where it's like fire and water. So you think of it as like lava, or you think of it as like, have you ever made ceviche?
I haven't made it, but I've had it before.
Yeah. And if you have it, they make it with lemon juice or lime juice, right? So that citrus actually cooks the food. It's this idea that acid and acidity has a fire in it, and it can actually cook things. And you want a certain amount of that all the time, right? Because we want to be warm beings. We want, we don't want to be like lizards and have to lay on a heat rock all day. But sometimes that can get too intense, especially for those of us who are more high achieving and, things like that, right? Or also when there's a lot of anger, and then also for women, certain times of the menstrual cycle where the blood is building and that intensity builds for people. So that would be the fire and the water, the pitta dosha. That's kind of the tangible expression of it. Comes with often these personality traits of like intensity. I'm pissed off. It comes with, because like the world is coming through our bodies, the quality of the inner state of the physicality of the body will affect how we perceive the outside world. So then the third dosha is kapha dosha, and that's kind of like slimy mucus, cerebrospinal fluid, lymph, different sort of like clear fluids in your bodies, which you need for lubrication. So like, even like your gut lining and stuff like that, you need, a little bit of a mucus layer on things for protection and lubrication and stuff. But if say you have like a ton of it, which my sister's going to hate me for saying this, but like I remember when my sister was little, my sister has always had a lot of kapha in her system, very juicy. She would like sneeze and the car and just snots would go all over the windshield, because she had so much mucus in her body and so, that's an example when you have that excess of that mucus in the body, when we see these are the ways that we're different, and that's why we don't all eat the same foods and need the same energy or crave the same weather or temperature or people or like the same music. It's because not just our life experience is different, but also the way our bodies are kind of tuning into the environment and experiencing the environment is really different.
Yeah. And I love that you said that. And thank you for explaining those three doshas. I know at first they can seem like, okay, what does this mean? But once you actually understand it, it's really helpful, even just to self-check in. Like I don't know what you think of those tests online that tell you what your balance is. So I just did it because I'm curious. And I think I always came out almost 50-50 on the first two. So pitta, and then the last one's like the lowest. And I definitely see both sides of those. I think a question that came to my heart is it ever too late though? Like, what if someone's already in their 50s? Or what if, like, I'm in my early 30s and I'm already aware of the collagen loss? Like, is it ever too late to start receiving the benefits or to even like reverse things that are happening after a certain age?
Yeah. Aging is interesting because our tissues are always regenerating. When we are regenerating, so, cells have a shelf life, they die and then new ones come. When we're regenerating, the question is, how are we regenerating? To a certain extent, yes, things can be regenerated, reversed, things like that. There are certain things like health conditions, for example, that do get too far down a disease pathway, which are very, very, very difficult to reverse. I don't know. Maybe somebody else might feel that everything can be healed. I have things in my body that I don't expect will ever be healed, that I just sort of, take care of for the rest of my life. I'm like, okay, this part of me has this like scar or whatever, and I just care for it. But a lot of it can be reversed, especially when it's something that's caught early. And the thing with aging is that if that is, say, vata, right, or pitta, that is not creating high quality tissues, then yes, something can be done. If it's, I live in the desert, which is a vata pitta environment, it's going to suck all the water out of you. It's, then it's learning how to eat the foods that will create the tissues in that environment that will regenerate more optimally, like eating lots of oils in the diet and things like that would be obviously very helpful and protective layer on the skin and stuff. So yeah, I think there's a lot that, and obviously sleep for something like what you're talking about is the best. Sleep is like the best medicine, for that. People who have more vata and pitta imbalances tend to have a harder time with sleep, especially the vata imbalances.
Yeah. I just pointed to myself, by the way, because we're recording this on video and I don't want to like jump to like connections that maybe aren't there, but it's funny because I grew up in Arizona and my family's Italian. And so we eat Mediterranean. It's all about the oils. And like, it's just so funny. I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's exactly right. So the sleeping, I'm curious to know then your thoughts because I have night terrors. So like I've had them since I was a kid and for some reason I never outgrew them. Can that be from an imbalance or like, what would you say to someone who came to you with sleep issues?
With sleep, there's the mind and then there's the body. And I tend to not get involved in mind content in the work that I do. Although I think that through changing the body, the mind content shifts, or at least our perception of events and things like that shifts, and our awareness shifts as well, because sometimes we actually have things physically blocked in our body and our awareness is actually cut off from something. And that's why, when we do a lot of cleansing with people, sometimes they might have a new awareness of something that even happened to them when they were younger that is quite overwhelming. So that's why all of these processes, really cleansing especially, have to be done with a lot of care and a lot of cocooning and an understanding that there's always like a raw spot in there before there's a rejuvenation that is more of the healing side of it. But there's usually like a raw spot in the middle. When it comes to sleeping though, I would say that there is a physical component to it. When the body is feeling this sense of lightness, I don't know if you've ever heard of the book, like The Unbearable Lightness of Being. It doesn't really have much to do with what we're talking, except that the words, the unbearable lightness of being, some people could probably hear the word lightness and think, wow, that would just feel amazing to feel light. And, there's this sort of upward movement. And some people who are feeling maybe heavy might hear that word and think, oh, that would feel good to me. But sometimes we actually can have too much lightness. And when we have too much lightness, that makes it difficult for us to just common sense, get grounded and settle in. And it's not just like our minds that are feeling this, it's the cells, it's everything. And the cells everything is being sort of held by a consciousness, right? So I think that if then the consciousness makes a decision to, okay, you know what? I'm going to go with a little more heavy. I'm going to go with a little more, whether it's warm or cool, like whatever the sort of sensation is that increases that sense of not being settled in the body. to oppose those and do those in the daily practices and the rituals right before sleep. So, and there's obviously a lot of great herbs that people take that can help with things like that as well. But I think it's, there's a lot that can be done through diet for people with sleep. And some people need a lot of sleep. Some people need little. Someone who's a kapha body type, which, you're not talking about yourself as that, but someone who has more kapha, they might sleep way too much. They might actually need to sleep less in order to feel motivated, to feel more alive, because there's this thing that happens with kapha dosha where people can actually get too comfortable. So much comfort can actually make us lethargic, unmotivated, unaware, things like that. So it's really all about finding this like beautiful spot to hang out in, which is not, too high or too low or too warm or too cold. And I think the reason that Ayurveda, we're so tapped into nature. When I started studying Ayurveda, I lived in a city, I lived in San Francisco, and I would walk through the concrete jungle. And the moment I started studying Ayurveda, I would just start looking at the trees as I was walking. I started becoming oriented toward nature, watching the wind, watching the moon. We're so obsessed with the things that humans have created. I got my iPhone and we're on, and all the technology that we have. So yeah, nature is there waiting for us to pay attention to her.
Yes. And I live in New York City and I totally get what you mean. Like I'll catch the flowers or, the birds and the squirrels in Central Park. And I just feel like, yeah, the orientation's much different. Are you still in San Francisco or where are you now?
Yeah, I live in Marin County, which is like just north. It's more woodsy. It's a lot more woodsy. There's a mountain here. Yeah, I love it. I love it here.
That sounds really, really nice. Okay, this is going to be super random, but I was so curious what you would say to this. So I read that you were on another podcast and you explained why you shouldn't hold in your sneezes, and your sister sneezing triggered that. And I'm like, okay, can you just tell me more about that? I just want to hear what.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, my sister's going to kill me. Sorry, Mel. The thing that's so cool about Ayurveda is that the texts that we study, not usually when you first start studying Ayurveda, because they're all written in Sanskrit and it's overwhelming to just go there right away. So we don't usually start studying the Sanskrit text till a little bit later. But they're written in poems. These books, they're so beautiful. They're written in sutras, kind of like, the Yoga Sutras as well, because I know you're into yoga, and the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is sort of the philosophical text of yoga that sort of teaches you how the mind works. And these sutras, they're very poetic. They really, really, really tell us the basic human animal wisdom of nature, like there are 11 natural urges of your animal body here, not the urges of your mind that are like, I need to go eat that chocolate or I need to go to the supermarket, not the thoughts, not that mental urges, but the body urges of, I got to sneeze. I have to yawn. I have to puke. I have to pee. I have to poop. Like all these sort of basic things that your animal body does that it just happens without you thinking about it. And it also needs, because it's all about like waves moving through your body, right? You have energy moving through your body. So a sneeze, for example, is one of the natural urges. And that means that we should never interfere with a natural urge when it comes up. And so this, I may have shared this story I used to sneeze because I saw my sister sneeze and the boogers would go everywhere. I became afraid to sneeze because I didn't want boogers to go everywhere, even though my body was totally different than hers. It wasn't as wet and things like that. So I developed this way of sneezing, which was like a little chirp, like, because I didn't want it to like go everywhere. I was in high school or college when this happened. And I did this in the summer. I was working at a summer camp and I did this sneeze. And this boy next to me goes, oh, so-and-so used to sneeze like that. And I thought back and I was like, wait a minute, that's the girl that died of an aneurysm. And I was like, whoa, I wonder if maybe I shouldn't sneeze like that. And so when I went to Ayurveda school and they taught us like why you don't hold these things in, it's because when you have energy moving through a container or a channel, and just picture a channel or a tube, and if you were to send water or air, squeeze something through it, and all of a sudden you block off the end of it through a muscle contraction, or you stick something in it or whatever, all the pressure is going to back up behind that. So it's really about physics. And so, yeah, that same thing. So if you have to sneeze, you got to let it out. If you have to yawn, let it happen. If you have to, if you naturally feel the urge to puke, if you get sick, I know a lot of people are afraid to do that. Like it has to happen. Or when you have to go pee, don't hold it. All of these things, they are natural urges of the body. And we get in the way of them because of social conditioning. It's not okay to do it right now, or I don't want to leave this meeting, or I've got to be here with this client, or I'll be embarrassed if I sneeze, or crying is also one of them.
That's the one that even if I try, I can't stop. A lot of times, like I'm very sensitive in that aspect, and stress, that's how I release my stress. I just cry. But the bathroom part, I'll sit on the couch and I'm like, I have to get this done. And I'll literally force myself to sit there. So now I'm going to remember this, and I'm going to make sure that I let myself go when I need to go.
Yeah, it's one of the wisdoms. We talk, like my podcast is called The Wisdom of the Body. And it's just listening to your body and not allowing your mind to like override what your body needs at that moment. We all do it.
Yeah, of course. Of course. And I can absolutely see how it would be a societal conditioning or cultural conditioning for sure. I also want to point out that when you started this journey, you came from a very practical standpoint, right? So like, I know with the Good Space, my goal is to make, things like this or spirituality in general. I want it to be accessible to people and them not feel like they just lose all sense of grounding. Like how you were saying earlier, where it's like, you're floating and you like don't have reason anymore or intellect or whatever. But I know that that's like, you are a very practical person. And so can you just describe a little bit about what attracted you to Ayurveda? And then also like, do you see it as practical? Do you consider yourself still practical, but it's just more open-minded? Like, I'm curious how that all plays together.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was head of product development for a health insurance company before I became an Ayurvedic practitioner. So you can't get more practical than that. It's sort of like insurance is like, safety, like get this thing to protect you. It's you can't get more practical than that, I think. And so it was a big deal for me to get to where I am. I would say my interest in Ayurveda probably, I was introduced to it through yoga, and most people in the United States were, or they traveled to India and experienced a cleanse there or something like that. That's typically how people hear about it. When I did my yoga teacher training, I was in my early 30s. I was married. I was trying to get pregnant, and it wasn't happening. And I wasn't happy. My solution was like, I'm going to go be a yoga teacher, take a yoga teacher training, because the only time I could think of where I feel this true peace that I'm really looking for, even though I'm not sure I really knew what I was looking for, the only time I ever felt that was when I was doing yoga or at the end of a yoga class or something like that. So I go to Costa Rica for a month. I lose 8 pounds. I develop a vegetarian diet, meditate every morning for 30 minutes. So this is like a month program thing. And I was absolutely manic. It was both amazing and terrifying at the same time. The amount of energy that was pumping through my body at that time. And it felt very destabilizing for me. And I came back and I actually left my husband and totally like upended my life from the level of transformation, how quickly I went through a transformation. And I think it's probably akin to like when people go out and do ayahuasca or something like that, or some sort of hallucinogenic drug, even though yoga and meditation are not hallucinogenic drugs. But anytime you go through a big change, to me, it is like a hallucinogenic drug. Like my whole time in India just felt like one big trip because everything is so different than what you're used to. And your orientation, your level of settledness is different. So when I started to learn about Ayurveda, I had been through yoga for many years. I had meditated every day and all that stuff. But Ayurveda was like the missing piece for my yoga journey, where yoga and meditation helped me develop more awareness and mastery of, say, like my will, my thoughts, my awareness. It sort of helped with that piece, but it never helped me with my emotions and my emotional body. And Ayurveda helped me do that. So it was a little more settled of an experience for me to go into the emotional experience, which is maybe not the case for everyone, because it can be quite traumatizing for a lot of people to go into their emotional experience. But because Ayurveda is a medicine, it helped me understand that transformation that is done very quickly will always destabilize a person, or any change that happens to a person that is a large change, that it will always destabilize a person, and that there are ways to change that are like incrementally stable and maybe even longer lasting, and don't make us feel like we've been thrown off our horse as much, or that we don't have self-control. Because I think when you suddenly get all this awareness, you're also sort of like, it's like spraying a fire extinguisher. It's like, whoa.
No, absolutely. And actually, I felt that way when I watched Dr. Joe Dispenza's, like he had like seminars or, recordings online, and my friend bought it. And she's like, I have it for just like 3 days. Do you want to like watch it? I was like, sure, why not? And some of the things that he shared, I just was like on my bed and I felt like I was like high, and I'm like, what is happening to me? And looking back, I think it's because an awareness had been reached, and like you said, like it's like a jolt in like a short amount of time. And I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do with myself? But I'm so glad that you pointed out that it doesn't have to be that way for everyone, and that you can do incremental changes that are more sustainable and long lasting. And I love that you pointed that out. And granted, for you, that was the perfect opportunity for you. I feel like that's what you needed. And you learned what you know what I mean? Like it seemed like it fit you, or at least looking back, maybe you can say that.
Absolutely. I can't say that any of it was wrong. I can't say that me going to Costa Rica for a month and, going through all that and blowing up my life. Like, I can't say that that was wrong, because later in life, like I said, we were trying to have a child back then. It was not happening. And then I actually do have a kid now. I have a new partner, and I love my life. Like, I'm not saying I didn't love it. I loved it as well back then, but there was something, I was not aligned fully, and I just feel, I love the way it happened. I love the way it ultimately ended up happening for me to become a mother this way. So I can't say any of it was wrong, but it certainly made me have an easier time to learn that there were other more sustainable ways to make change in my own life. And also, I have, like, for example, it's not a specialty of mine, but I have worked with some people who've gone to do, ayahuasca trips in Peru or something like that. They have a hard time reintegrating. It's like a big theme of when you make a big transformation, how do you integrate the learnings into your life? Because you're not going to run off to the woods. I mean, some people will, but most of us are going to live here in the world, and we're going to get involved in our communities, and we're going to, be quote unquote householders, as they say in the yoga traditions. We want to be involved in the world. We're not going to become a monk or an ascetic or something like that. And so that's a more practical approach to approaching change, I think.
And you're absolutely right that we're not all going to be able to or wanting to go live in the woods, away from society. Like, we actually have to make this work for what our life looks like or will look like. Really quick then, if someone listening thinks this sounds very interesting, this is maybe something I want to try, what are like a few things or a few steps that like here moving forward they could try to start integrating Ayurveda, or at least to learn more about it?
there are a couple really big components to learning about your particular body type. And I know you talked about the quizzes. There's a lot of quizzes online. I don't think they're bad. I think they're always limited to how we see ourselves. And how we see ourselves is not always accurate. It's like an entry point, I think, to know that you are a certain way, but it could also be how you see yourself, and how you see yourself might not be true. So that's why I always try to bring it back to the physicality, because we get so caught up in mind, in our thoughts and things like that. So bringing back into this physicality, into the sensory experience is very important. And just thinking about, how do I use my senses in the world? Right? How do I use my senses in the world? I have these eyes, I have skin. So the eyes, I see through them. The ears, I hear through them. The skin, I feel when someone touches my skin, or when I touch it, or if the wind blows. That's how I feel. My environment, the touch, my smell, I can smell something. And we might notice as women that some of these senses change throughout the month, even for us. What I'm most passionate about is helping people reconnect with their primal animal nature. And I will oppose that with thought, right? So getting out of the thoughts, getting out of the head, getting out of the beliefs, memories, all of these things, and just getting into that present moment sensory experience. So meditations on the senses, I think, are extremely important, and not necessarily something that every Ayurvedic practitioner would do with you, but we do focus a lot on the care of the senses. So your eyes, if I was just meeting with a client yesterday who's literally going blind, and is, now that she's using the tech more to connect with people right now, her blindness is getting worse, So really understanding how the things in our environment that we bring into our senses are affecting our senses. So that's one part of it, but also like, what gives us pleasure? What gives us comfort? There are certain sounds that will give us pleasure and comfort. There are certain sounds that will make us uncomfortable. And being very curious about that, because it's what all the things that people tell you about what is healthy and not healthy. Maybe there's a little bit of truth to it, but the truth is that we all have very different experiences of the world, and all have different needs. And the more we tune into our internal experience, the more we're going to make decisions that are better for our bodies. So in terms of making that more tangible, because I know you want to get more practical, a meditation where you maybe choose, I'm going to just sit here and concentrate on my sense of smell. Or maybe you go through all the senses. I start with my eyes and I notice what happens when I close them. Or maybe you do a gazing meditation where you gaze at something for a while. And that will be your meditation for your eyes. And then you could do a meditation for sound. You can play different sounds. There's sound healing has gotten very big. So that could be a cool way. Or even playing with songs that are different pitches. And then let's see, the tastes. Oh my gosh, we do so much about tastes in Ayurveda. We didn't even, talk about that sense yet. But because we treat people through food, we treat people through spices, we treat, it's a big part of Ayurveda, that you can even experiment with different tastes. You can go in your spice cabinet and literally just put a little of a spice on your finger and lick it and notice, what does it do? Or just taste one food. What does this do? So let's just play with this. Think of a lemon. Just think of it and what's happening.
I get a little tingly because it's like I'm anticipating the sourness.
Where do you feel the tingle?
I feel it in my jaw, and then sometimes in my body. The weird thing is that I love spicy food and foods that create that kind of sensation. So anytime I'm about to eat a pickle or something spicy, my whole body tingles. It's the weirdest thing ever.
Yeah, it's not weird actually, because the sour taste, which is what we're talking about, causes secretion of glands in the body. So the sour taste, that's why you feel that there's a gland in there. And so you might be feeling other glands secreting as well, being triggered by that.
So funny to think about. I'm like, is something wrong with me? Because like I just love those foods and I love olives and stuff, and it always is like, oh my gosh. So that's very interesting. I love.
Yeah. Yeah. And salt is different. Salt is also like warming and wet. That's considered the pitta food, salt. The more salt, it'll increase the pitta up, the water retention and things like that, but also the warmth of the body.
Interesting. Maybe does that mean maybe I'm out of balance if I crave those a lot, or maybe it's like too much in gear? Cause like I love salty foods.
It's difficult to know with cravings, what is a craving of the mind and what is the craving of the body. If it's something you crave all the time, it could be a craving of the mind and habit, right? But if it's something that comes out of nowhere, where one day you're like, I just have to have eggplant parmesan. And you're like, you don't know why it happened. It just came out of nowhere. You got to listen to that because, I think that it's those weird things that come out of nowhere that we can trust a little bit more, because it's really being tapped into that more beginner mind experience thing as opposed to the habit stream of, but it could be that you chronically need the salt, that like it could be like, because of what you said about the sleep and stuff, it could be that your body wants more hydration. And that's one way it's going to get it, is if you increase your salt. So I can't say whether or not that's a bad craving for you.
That's so interesting. Such an interesting concept and like way to think about it. I feel like we could have so many episodes just on like these senses alone. And, I believe that as spiritual beings, every experience and every sensation is for the fact of learning our preferences, learning what we need. And the way that you explain the senses, I'm like, that just makes so much sense on like so many levels. And I know we're getting towards the end here, but I feel like I couldn't leave without asking you really quick. And if this is a topic where you're like, we need a whole other thing, totally fine. But I have a few friends who are struggling with infertility. They're doing IVF treatments and they felt so discouraged because actually both friends have done it a few times and it hasn't worked for them. So I know it's like a huge topic and there's probably like so much diversity in women, but is there anything you would say to someone struggling right now with fertility? And is there a gentle, non-triggering way to give them your book or just even any comfort?
Yeah, I would say that when I wrote my book for the intention of, before even trying to conceive a child, that you get your body in balance, all of your body, not just your reproductive channel, because there could be like a local thing happening that's out of balance, or it could be like a systemic thing, right? And it's not just you, it's your partner, it's whole complicated, it's the universe, it's very mysterious. So when I wrote this book for people who were interested in, say, like preparing for pregnancy. I don't know exactly who's reading it, but in terms of people who have reached out to me to work one-on-one, I would say there are more people who have reached out to work with me who've already been trying to get pregnant, and are having difficulty, and many who are going through IVF and things like that. So I think at any point in the process, someone could make the decision, I am going to take care of me. I am going to take care of my health and be in my absolute best health before I conceive my child. And that actually me being in my best health is actually more important than me conceiving a child. And coming from that place, because it will make everything down the road easier if we come at it from that place. So, I think at any point, if anybody decides they want to take a break, one of the common things I do with people, actually, which I didn't write about in the book, it's something that I've done more in practice since I've met so many of these women that are going through this, that they oftentimes feel that process of going through IVF was traumatizing physically, mentally, and so many emotionally, that I will work with them between rounds. sometimes, or like I have one woman who's been doing it for years and she just, doesn't want to do it anymore. And so it's really about getting the body back in a balance. And then you can still decide to go down the medical path if you want, or you can decide you're going to do the roll the dice method and just live your life. And it's a very difficult decision because we have these choices now available to us. It is in itself its own spiritual journey to go through that process. And the reason it's a spiritual journey is because we have so many things in our lives that we can control. We don't like that we can't control this. And that is why it's a spiritual journey. It's very difficult. But yeah, so I think if somebody wanted to read the book who was interested in having their best health, even if they're going through the medical process, assisted reproductive technology process, that this book is complementary to that process as well.
I'm going to definitely get it for them, and I'm going to get it for myself as well, because we're not trying yet, but we will want to in the next year or so. And I think just even feeling good and healthy, I would want to do that even without having kids in the equation, like you said. So definitely going to be picking that up. So thank you so much, Heather, for giving us your energy and your time and your knowledge. And if people want to connect with you, where
I would say the easiest places would be my website, which is heathergrzych.com. That's Heather GRZYCH.com. I know it's a very weird last name. It's hard to spell. If you get it sort of right, maybe Google will find it for you. And then I have a podcast called Wisdom of the Body. You can listen to that, find it on the website. It's also on like Apple and Spotify and Stitcher and all that. And I'm not super active on Instagram. I'm like a little bit active on Instagram. I've been very active on Clubhouse. I love that forum. So people can connect with me in all those places, and I'd be very happy to connect with them.
Heather, thank you. Is there any last thought that you want to leave?
I would say that it's hard to be a human, and it's beautiful to be a human. And living with that dichotomy, living with that paradox, living with that, it's that they coexist, and that is what makes everything so beautiful. That it's all there, and it's so wonderful to be alive. And, with the time that we're recording this, it's spring, and it's a time for rebirth. It is an absolute time for rebirth and regeneration. So ride that wave now of the rebirth and the regeneration.
Now it's time for an affirmation. I listen to my body and tune into it every day to live a life that feels more aligned. If you found today's tips inspiring or thought-provoking, share it right now on social media and make sure to tag me at Francesca A. Phillips or at Find Your Good Space, and also weigh in the comment section at findyourgoodspace.com. You can find links in the show notes. And if you have a spiritual or mindfulness problem that you want me to unpack on an upcoming The Good Space episode, or an awesome manifesting story you want to share, give my podcast phone line a ring right now at 917-719-0867. Also, don't forget to download my free morning routine guide. It's what helped me reduce my anxiety, increase productivity, and so much more. The link to everything I mentioned is in the show notes. See you soon.